We are talking Bats from 1999, directed by Louis Monroe, who has directed a variety of kind of low-budget creature features and B-movies. It stars Lou Diamond Phillips, of course, from many movies, including Young Guns, and Dina Meyer, who you may know from Starship Troopers, among others. So this is a 1999 film, and I bought a bunch of kind of bat-related movies just because I fancied having a kind of a little bit of a marathon of bat films. So this is the first one. This one I actually have seen before when it came out. It actually did spawn a sequel, which I have purchased, which I have never seen before, called Bats Human Harvest, which was a 2006 movie. Now this one, you may not realise looking at it now, was actually a theatrical movie. You know, it kind of gets lost in the shuffle of straight to kind of DVD or straight to video kind of creature features and kind of horror films, but it was actually made as a theatrically released movie. The budget was around $5.5 million, and that's in 1999. It didn't make a huge amount of money, you know, in regards to profit. I think it made its budget back and made a kind of a modest profit when it went to kind of like video and ancillary services, but ultimately it was a reasonably budgeted movie, certainly kind of for its time, and we'll talk a little bit about that when I kind of go into the movie. But what is the plot? Well, it focuses on this small Texan town which is besieged by these genetically enhanced bats. Now, these bats have been created by a mad scientist type as a kind of a biological weapon, which has basically also infused them with a kind of a virus, which means these kind of aggressive behaviour and these mutations spread through to the kind of the bat population at large, meaning that these kind of bats are a little bit like a virus themselves, spreading infecting other bats. And these bats are ones that will now attack kind of humans and ultimately kill them because they are in higher intelligence and things like this. So they present a real threat to humanity, and this Texan town is under siege of them. And the military ultimately is going to wipe this town off the face of the earth with a kind of a, you know, variety of missile strikes. But it's up to our town sheriff, played by Lou Diamond Phillips, and a kind of a bat expert, along with a kind of a handful of supporting characters, to try and you know, save the town and kind of destroy this bat menace before it consumes everyone. What'll happen? Well, you'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about what works in this movie. Now, as I've mentioned, this movie actually is more of a higher production value than you may expect. It kind of reminds me, if you've seen the Blob remake with Kevin Dillon, it looks similar in way to the production value of that film. So say $5 million in 1999, so, you know, that was a relatively kind of, you know, medium budget movie. So it's certainly not kind of like a cheapo you know, horror film made for, you know, chains behind the sofa. And considering our main stars here are Lou Diamond Phillips and Dina Meyer, you know, recognisable names to be sure, but maybe not A-list, certainly not costing mega bucks. The budget here has clearly been spent on the kind of the production design, the production value, and, you know, VFX. And that's the thing I think you'll notice most about this film, and what I would say is its biggest strength is it has a strong production feel to it. A lot of this kind of movies that came out around the turn of the century, this being a 1999 film, started to use kind of CGI, and obviously that era of CGI hasn't really kind of aged particularly well. And there is some sequences with CGI, particularly when the bats are kind of flying around in the distance. But I was kind of surprised to remember how much of this movie is actually practical effects. I mean, they use puppets, animatronics for the most part, and we see a lot of the bats, and we kind of see these kind of animatronic bats kind of moving their heads around and snarling and looking around and stuff. It looks pretty good. I thought the effects here were pretty good. Yeah, a couple of kind of CGI, you know, where we kind of see the swarm of bats and stuff, but for the most part, I have to say I thought the effects here were pretty good, and the whole kind of production just feels like it's had a little bit more money spent on it. You know, we have this small American town there's a large cast of extras here. I mean, towards the end of the film, we see all these kind of military types turn up, and there's like, you know, dozens of soldiers, lots of military hardware. There's an attack about midway through the film where they're about to attack this small town, and we see lots of little vignettes where we have these bats attacking different people, and they're crashing through windows, and there's loads of extras kind of just running around. There's chaos everywhere. You know, so we get a reasonable amount of money spent on screen here that you probably won't, you know, you think, oh, that looks pretty kind of well done compared to a lot of the kind of like the movies. And like I said, this one was a theatrically released movie, although it kind of probably gets put on with the straight to DVD stuff now. The sequel was straight to DVD though, not straight to TV. So yeah, the production design all looks pretty good. Now this movie also has like a little bit of a fun factor. This is partly because I think the movie is a little bit tongue-in-cheek. It's quite well paced. There's kind of a good amount of kind of like, you know, bat-related kind of like attacks in this movie. You know, our heroes are very uncomplicated. They're kind of like, you know, your typical heroic sheriff played by Phillips. You've got the competent and spunky kind of bat expert played by kind of Dina Meyer. You've got the stereotypical kind of like comedy relief sidekick and things like this. Plenty of kind of like cannon fodder. We've got a mad scientist who's like, you know, the kind of the corporate asshole. It's all kind of like fun, sort of admittedly somewhat stereotypical kind of characters, but they're kind of fun. There's a lot of like one-liners here. That's gonna be a little bit in my negatives. We'll talk about that. But yeah, there's an attempt here to have this kind of like light-hearted, this kind of fun, schlocky kind of feel to it, which gives it this kind of like B-movie charm, I would suggest. The acting, I would say, is for the most part okay. I think some of the dialogue we'll talk about in a minute, but yeah, the acting's not too bad, really. I mean, Phillips, Dina Meyer, and we got a couple of other recognisable faces here. They're, you know, they're established working actors. They kind of know what they're doing. You know, there's a little bit of an ecological message in here. I think the idea of these kind of bats kind of spreading like a virus is quite fun. And then we have quite an impressive, I say, middle section of the movie as well. A lot of films kind of like dip in that kind of like that second act. This one, I would say, it actually peaks in its second act. The third act kind of is in this kind of large cave where there's this big lake of guano, which is kind of bat poo, you might say. Yeah, but that wasn't quite as fun as the middle section, if you ask me. But yeah, overall it's a kind of a punchy, kind of quite well realised film. Lots of kind of good practical effects. It's not especially gory, if I'm honest. I think this movie was made to be a little more gory, but it was kind of trimmed down to be a PG-13. So, you know, it is what it is. There's an okay amount of kind of like deaths and stuff, but you know, it's nothing kind of outstanding really. But it's a fun, sort of punchy, well-paced kind of movie with likeable characters. You know, a human villain which you can kind of like, you know, hate behind, and some good and interesting creature effects. So, what doesn't work? Let me touch upon some of the things I've just mentioned, but in a negative sense. The dialogue here, I've got to be honest with you, is a little bit kind of like eye-rolling. I mean, there's like, from what I was reading, there's some of these lines were improvised, and the dialogue, people feel like they've got to kind of always finish a sentence with a kind of like a one-liner, or a kind of like, or be sort of a smart aleck remark. And it's really cheesy at times. I mean, the dialogue here, the acting's okay, but the dialogue is just like, oh God, I can't believe they said that. It's some of the most trite dialogue. Not all the way through the film, admittedly, but there are plenty of moments where you'll think, oh God, that's just so trite. So the dialogue is not very good. For some sequences, there's an unusual amount of shaky cam, considering this is not a found footage movie. These scenes where we have these bats attacking this kind of town, which to me is the best scene in the film. For some reason, there's a lot of shaky cam in that sequence. It doesn't really make any sense, but whatever. So a little bit too much shaky cam at times. So yeah, some of the CGI, kind of the bats and stuff are, you know, are a little bit kind of dated now. The movie is incredibly predictable. You know, it's going to go exactly the way you think it's going to go. Our characters are very, very broad stereotypes. They have no depth whatsoever. You know, there's no attempt here to have, you know, layered characters or anything like that. They're just kind of like your stereotypical heroic or villainous archetypes. There's an extraordinarily annoying comic relief here, who initially apparently was not meant to be a comic relief. He was meant to be, his role was meant to be somewhat straight, but they changed it whilst filming to make it this comedic relief. His character seems completely superfluous, and I've got to be honest with you, it sometimes borders on a little bit of a stereotype, shall we say. So I didn't really like his character, but I think it's, you know, maybe that his writing wasn't good. So, and the only thing I would say, I think that it peaks halfway through this film. You know, it's a fun film, but I think its best sequence, it didn't finish the best foot last. Its best sequence was the attack of the town. I think the ending sequence wasn't as exciting. You know, different location, it looks different because it's in a cave, but it wasn't quite as thrilling, I would say, as the sequences in the movie. So overall, though, what do we think? Well, it's certainly not a perfect movie. It's not even a necessarily a particularly good movie, but I would pip it as a just above average movie for this kind of type of film that it's trying to be. It's enjoyable, it's fun, it is dumb, but, you know, it is a fun creature feature which has some value behind it, some production value. It looks pretty good, and it's at least enjoyable. It's not deep, but you can kind of like it on a somewhat surface level. So for me, it's a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? Bats 1999. What did you think of it? And have you seen the sequel, Human Harvest, which came out in 2006? 6 out of 10. What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.